This is a reconstructed image of a woman who had no name. Her identity, a mystery that police believed impossible to solve. That was until 48 years later, when a group of amateur internet sleuths finally cracked the case. On June 8, 1968, at 9:30 a.m., the body of a woman in her early 20s was found slumped over a picnic table in Griffith Park, Los Angeles, right along Mount Hollywood Drive. The woman was about 5'2", her eyes were brown, and her hair was bleached blonde, indicating that it could have originally been a darker shade. She was wearing a polka-dot print bikini, along with a light tan overcoat, and on her feet, she wore a pair of dark-colored sandals. Her clothes aside, she had no other belongings, and there was no ID card, photograph, or anything with an address to identify her, all except for one object on her finger, a gold wedding ring with the inscription CB to EJ, 9420, 18K. There were no footprints, no disturbances, and no sign of a struggle. There seemed to be no immediate indications of foul play. It was a mystery how she ended up in the middle of a public park, given her unusual attire. But later, during the autopsy, the coroner was able to clear one mystery up. The cause of death was a morphine overdose. Whether it was a self-inflicted one, however, remained to be seen. The police were able to discover very little, but according to the coroner records, they came to believe that she was staying at the nearby Hollywoodland Motel. It's unclear how the police made this connection, but perhaps her photo was shared and someone at the motel recognized her. Regardless, they learned that she had stayed there under the name Cheryl Miller. This was her initial pseudonym, however. Without any positive indication, the coroner gave her the moniker name Jane Doe No. 18. No one, be it her friends, family, or any possible lover, ever came forward to identify her. For nearly 50 years, this woman would go on nameless, lost to time and memory, a small blip in history, and a footnote in the ever-increasing list of the missing and nameless. But this case would not remain on this list forever. Several remarkable individuals would eventually come together to piece together the puzzle, uncover her name, and bring solace to her loved ones. And it all began thanks to a single photograph. Her case found its way to the Web Sleuths Forum, a website where amateur sleuths and detectives from around the world pool their efforts to investigate a variety of unsolved criminal cases. On October 30th, 2009, user Mema started a thread on the forum. Came across this case, possibly named Cheryl Miller, according to the case file. It just caught my attention because the body was found around my birth date. Also was struck by the photo of the young woman in the case file. Out of respect for the family, we won't be showing the post-mortem photograph being referenced, which shows her face, eyes closed, in black and white. Despite the scant amount of information to go on, the sleuths got to work to figure out who Cheryl was. Their attention first centered around the gold ring found on her finger with the inscription CB to EJ, 9420, 18K. It was by far their biggest clue. But they were also concerned because of her attire. A bikini and light coat was not usually something one wore in the early morning, especially deep in the park. User Jules Sleuther remarked, "It sounds like she had been modeling because of the bikini and coat. There was a serial killer in LA in the 1960s who impersonated a modeling photographer. He would put ads in the Hollywood acting publications." The sleuths tried to retrace Cheryl's steps to figure out what she was doing at Griffith Park, and how she made it there in the first place. Some speculated that she could have been attending a late-night party or informal concert with her friends, which would explain her clothes. The nearest beach at Santa Monica was 20 miles away, hardly walking distance. Jules Sleuther also noted that the hotel Cheryl was staying at was 10 miles away. In their mind, there were 3 distinct possibilities. She either walked to the park on foot, took a taxi, or she had someone else drive her. They added, "The Greek Theater is not too far from where she was found. I wonder if there was a concert that she went to there, perhaps with others, and then ingested drugs at the concert and overdosed." While combing through the names of other individuals who went missing at around the same time, Jules Sleuther discovered 3 women that bore an uncanny resemblance to Cheryl: Lynn Bandringa, Donis Redman, and Darlene Polizzi. The members compared the photos, scrutinizing every detail. However, user Distracted1976 pointed out, "A concern I have for Donis and Lynn is that they do not have brown eyes as listed." Mema also weighed in. "Yes, Donis really seems to resemble her, but the more I look, the more I think the mouth and lips and the chin are wrong. Also, there's no getting past the difference in eye color. So, I don't think Donis, Lynn, or Darlene are matches. Since it was unlikely that any of these women were Cheryl, attention returned to the ring. User PFF thought it could be a family heirloom, and that they could get more information from the Doe Network, a non-profit organization that works with law enforcement on missing persons cases. Perhaps there, a connection could be made with the initials and date inscriptions. But that all changed when a man named Carl Koppelman joined the Web Sleuths investigation and gave them some hope.
Ever had a bad habit you just couldn't break? Next time, reach for Fume, the award-winning flavored air device and sponsor of today's video. Fume is not a vape. It has no battery, no nicotine, no vapor, and no toxins. It doesn't heat anything either, which means you're not inhaling vapor, just naturally flavored air to help satisfy those cravings without the downside. Like cinnamon hearts, spearmint, or our favorite, black licorice, a sweet and strong classic flavor. The best part? Fume's premier sleek wooden design is built for both flavor and function, since it doubles as a fidget toy. Magnetic snaps, clicks, and an adjustable airflow dial with a satisfying sound. Over 500,000 people have made the switch to Fume as part of their habit change journey. For a limited time, if you order the Journey Pack using code BREW, you'll get a free Fume topper. Click the link tryfume.com/brew or scan the QR code on the screen to get yours today. And now, back to the story.
53-year-old Carl Koppelman was scrolling through the Los Angeles coroner's website when he stumbled upon the photo of the mystery woman that was found in Griffith Park. Much like Mema, Cheryl's face left a strong impression on him. On April 24, 2010, using photo reconstruction software, Carl came up with an image of what the woman may have looked like alive, in color, with her brown eyes now open. He shared it on the Web Sleuths forum, where he also served as a moderator. This wasn't Carl's first time doing this sort of thing. He's a well-respected member of Web Sleuths, with a passion for uncovering the truth of cases that many others had already given up on. Though he was an accountant by trade, Carl also had a knack for the arts. His reconstruction and age progression images have brought countless families closure and helped law enforcement close cases that had gone on for far too long. His talents were especially invaluable in the case of Woman 82843, which we covered in another video, where a woman had gone unidentified for over 40 years. It was his reconstructed photograph, along with the investigative efforts of a college student named Christina Skates, that led to the woman finally being identified and returned to her family after so many years. In this case, Carl's photo gave a fresh, clearer perspective into what Cheryl may have looked like alive. Of course, there were some challenges. The original post-mortem photo was at a weird, slanted angle, her eyes were closed, and her hair was unlikely to be in its original style. Carl had to do a lot to compensate for these to create a more faithful image of her. People's lips flatten and their mouths widen post-mortem, and I usually try to compensate by puffing them up, narrowing the mouth and raising the corners a little. I did the same with her cheeks by giving her cheeks a little body. Her hair was difficult to imagine, given the photo angle and the fact that any hairstyle would have been disturbed by then, but he gave it a shot anyway. Okay, here she is with an updo. It seems a little too formal for a young woman hanging out in the Griffith Park in the 60s, and her hair isn't quite that bundled up in the post-mortem photo, but it does kind of help out on the facial resemblance, even though I did very little to her face. Thanks to Carl, there was now a much greater chance for someone to identify her, even if half a century had already passed. But while her photo made her more recognizable, attention quickly turned to the mysterious circumstances behind her death. User Dreamweaver pointed out that Senator Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated in Los Angeles on June 5, 1968, 3 days prior to the discovery of Cheryl's body. But what made this bit of information relevant is that the Ambassador Hotel, where he was shot, was just a little over 4 miles away from Griffith Park. On May 4, 2010, Carl speculated, if any of you think that this is something more than a strange coincidence and think that she might have been somehow connected with the primary campaign of RFK, we could probably send an email with her photo to radio talk show host Michael Medved. Carl did end up sending an email to the radio host. In it, he stated, "On the Web Sleuths message board, we have speculated based on the fact that she was checked into a motel in the vicinity of RFK's campaign event in the days following that event, that maybe she was somehow connected, perhaps as a volunteer, to the Robert F. Kennedy presidential campaign, and perhaps the grief of the RFK assassination led her to engage in self-destructive behavior, drugs or alcohol that led to her demise." However, there was another possible explanation for what Cheryl may have been doing in that area, trying to be a movie star. She was, after all, a stone's throw away from Hollywood, and it would better explain why she was in a bikini. It was commonplace for aspiring actors and movie extras looking to break into the industry to take up residence in motels near the studios, and there were plenty of those to go around. Carl mentioned Disney, Warner Bros., NBC, and Universal all have studio lots in that immediate area. The park is not that far from the motel or from the studios. User Geostar suggested that Cheryl may have been an extra on the movie Candy, which would have been in production at the time. It starred a Swedish actress whom Cheryl also resembled. It was a rather risque film, but it would line up with Cheryl's clothes and her proximity to the nearby studios. The movie was a low-grade item, experimenting with drugs, mixtures of drugs. Who knows? Maybe she was administered some of the real stuff and overdosed in the park. But then, on May 13th, 2010, user Fairy1 put forward a promising potential identity. What do you all think of Anita K. Drake? On October 15th, 1963, Anita K. Drake, who was one of 12 siblings, was celebrating her 15th birthday. At 4:30 p.m., Anita left her house to go to a nearby Campion Dairy, a soda store that was a popular hangout spot for teenagers, to supposedly hang out with her friends. It was a trip that wouldn't and shouldn't have taken long, but when there was still no sign of her at 11 p.m., her worried parents notified authorities that their daughter was missing. She was last seen wearing a gray skirt, a black coat over a white hooded sweater, and a pair of beige flats. She stood at 5'4", had light brown hair and eyes, and a single identifying mark, a small mole below her lip. Her family and relatives noted that she was going through a bit of a rebellious streak at the time. Because of this, they naturally assumed that she had run away in an act of defiance. But as time went on, and with zero contact from her, they began to suspect that something else must have happened. For the next 5 Christmases, Anita's mother would receive a phone call, but each year when she picked up, on the other end of the line was nothing but complete, eerie silence. The caller would always hang up without saying a word. Anita's mother was convinced it was her daughter. Her family, on the other hand, were far more pessimistic. One of Anita's brothers speculated that she was hit by a truck and her body was buried somewhere nearby. The phone calls, then, could be the killer quietly tormenting and taunting them. Though the sleuths were initially skeptical that Cheryl and Anita could have been the same person, a closer examination revealed several compelling similarities between them. For one thing, the 3 previous women whom the sleuths believed to be Cheryl, for instance, did not have brown eyes, but Anita did. Excitement spiked. Intrigued, Carbuff was quick to create a side-by-side comparison photo so that the other sleuths could paint a better picture. It wasn't at all hard to see the incredible resemblance. Carbuff realized that the phone calls that Anita's mother received between the years of 1963 and 1967 perfectly fit the timeline of Jane Doe's death. Griffith Park Jane Doe died before another Christmas came around. The resemblance was uncanny, and the timeline fit. There was an extremely strong possibility that Cheryl's real name could very well be Anita Drake. I really believe this might be a good possibility, though it could be really difficult to confirm. Thoughts? Bump. Can I get some eyes on this comparison, Carl? I believe this may be Anita. The nose looks a little off when you compare those 2 pictures, but much closer when you look at her other pictures and the actual post-mortem photo. I think you should submit it. Carl finally chimed in. I do think that there is enough of a resemblance between GPJD and Anita Drake that it would be worth looking into. Hopefully there are fingerprints or dentals on Anita, as I don't think there is any DNA on Griffith Park Jane Doe. The sleuths left emails and voice messages to the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, while user Murky Waters directly contacted Anita Drake's case manager at NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. All they could do now was wait. The minutes turned to days, then weeks, then months. May 2016. An entire year has passed since the resemblance was first brought up and tips were sent to the authorities, but there were no replies. They also came to the realization that there may be no way to confirm a match. Fairy1 asked, "Is there anything happening with the potential match?" Carl replied, "No. Without dentals, there is nothing that can be done. There is no DNA on Griffith Park Jane Doe and no dentals on Anita." They chalked up the lack of DNA samples or even a strand of hair to 2 factors: the fact that it was 1968 and the police procedure at the time. Carl explained that they usually cremate bodies that are unidentified or identified but have no one who can afford to claim them. They often only took DNA samples for certain cases like homicides, where there were usually more blood and tissue samples. The sleuths were crushed. Dionysia remarked, "It seems like certain identification is an impossibility then." Fairy1 somberly wrote, "So, how can this be solved? I'm thinking whoever was with her when she overdosed, no doubt she was with others. What a sad end." Despite the sleuth's best efforts, it seemed that this Jane Doe would be yet another unfortunate soul lost to time. They needed another, fresher angle, an outside perspective that could break this whole case wide open. 44-year-old Santa Clarita resident Rita Hood was scrolling through Facebook and stumbled upon the photo reconstruction of Cheryl Miller on Carl's profile. He had it posted there after posting it on Web Sleuths. Rita and Carl had met before. They used to be co-workers at Princess Cruises. Rita worked there as an accountant, while Carl was a senior financial analyst. Rita carefully scanned the photo and, like the others, was intrigued by it. But what caught her attention was the ring and the inscription, CB to EJ, 9420 18K. The date written on it, September 4th, just so happened to be her birthday. Whether some sort of inexplicable sign or a stroke of extreme coincidence, it was striking enough that Rita thought to search for the name of the woman who owned the ring. She wasn't a professional investigator or researcher by any means, but she did have an immense curiosity for the past. She was an amateur genealogist in her spare time, someone who walked along the threads of history to figure out the names of long-forgotten ancestors. It would not be an easy task. Rita had only initials to go by, and there were hundreds, if not thousands, of possible matches, not to mention the inconsistent record-keeping of that time. Still, Rita was determined to search for an answer. She used Ancestry.com to sift through thousands of online marriage records. Married individuals with the initials CB and EJ were her targets. Though her mission was difficult, it was theoretically not impossible. Rita made things easier by only looking at the top 10 most popular female names of the early 1900s that started with E, like Elizabeth, Ethel, and Edna. Then, she only focused on those who had a last name starting with J. With her search range narrowed down, she began looking at individuals who married a man with the initials C and B. Rita's labors did not bear fruit overnight. The sheer volume of records meant that she could only dedicate a bit of her spare time, a few hours every night after midnight, to search. Finally, after a month, Rita found a Charles J. Bush who married Edna Lydia J. in Detroit in September 4th, 1920, CB to EJ. 9420. It was an exact match. With this promising lead, Rita looked at online census records for more information. She discovered that Edna was just 30 years old when she died from an illness in 1932. Whoever the Griffith Park Jane Doe was, it clearly wasn't Edna. And yet, she was somehow in possession of her wedding ring. Rita dug deeper to figure out the connection between them. She eventually learned that Edna was survived by 2 daughters, one of whom was Geraldine Bush, who married a man named John Paul Manzo in 1960. On September 9th, Rita went on Facebook and found a one John Paul Manzo Jr., who lived across the state in Clovis, Fresno County. She sent him a message, hopeful that John Paul Manzo Jr. was the son of her John Paul Manzo. Just 2 days later, Rita received a reply from John, who confirmed that John Paul was his father, Geraldine was his mother, and that Edna was indeed his grandmother. Rita's eyes widened. She asked him if he happened to know who was in possession of his grandmother's wedding ring because it had been found on an unidentified woman in the 1960s. John remembered that his older sister, Cheryl, with a C, not an S, McMillan, not Miller, wore their late grandmother's wedding ring, and she had gone missing nearly 50 years ago. He asked Rita to call him, and she promptly picked up the phone and dialed John's phone number. He asked Rita the question that had been gnawing at him for decades. "My sister has been missing since 1968. When was your Jane Doe found?" Rita replied, "June 8th, 1968. His sister had been missing for nearly 50 years. He had long abandoned all hope of finding out what happened to her, and now, the answer he and dozens of online sleuths had been searching for was staring him right in the face. But whether or not it was the correct answer remained to be seen. Carl shared these exciting developments on Web Sleuths on September 11th, 2016. Griffith Park Jane Doe may finally have a name, Cheryl McMillan of Campbell, California. It hasn't yet been confirmed, but I am certain that this is a good match. Above his post was a side-by-side comparison between his original photo reconstruction and a remarkably well-preserved old photograph of Cheryl. Special thanks to my friend and former co-worker Rita Winswick Hood, who was following my Facebook page and took it upon herself to research this case. Rita researched the ring with the initials CB to EJ 9/4/1920. Only one couple with those initials were married on that date. Charles Bush married Edna J on September 4th, 1920 in Detroit. Charles and Edna were Cheryl's grandparents. They looked alike to be sure. The dates also align nicely, but they've had a convincing match before in Anita Drake, and that led nowhere. But for now, the responses were positive. Wow, great work! This has to be a match. Well done, Rita. This is the sort of good old-fashioned sleuthing that solves cases. Great work by your friend. Visually, Cheryl and Jane Doe looked very much alike. However, the earlier problem that plagued them with Anita still remained. They still had no way to positively identify them through DNA evidence. Carl explained, Cheryl's brother is unaware of the existence of any dental records, or any personal items of hers that might have had fingerprints. But there was something that John did have that could help. His memories. John was barely 6 years old when his sister, Cheryl McMillan, suddenly disappeared from their home. Though most of his memories of her had long faded, he could still clearly remember the care and affection she showered him with. A doting old sister that looked after her younger sibling. But beyond this, he could recall little. Growing up, he only learned about Cheryl through the stories and memories from his older siblings and family. John and Cheryl were only half-siblings. Cheryl was from their mother's previous marriage. Shortly after Cheryl graduated from their local high school in 1964, she moved to Los Angeles and, unfortunately, became rather distant from her family. So their mother, concerned that she had not heard from Cheryl in a while, sent a private investigator to look for her. Searching across the state, the investigator finally found Cheryl in LA, but Cheryl wasn't keen to return home, so she simply asked the investigator to tell her mother that she was fine. She just wanted to be left alone. But this would not be the last time she would contact her family. A few years later, she began dating a man whose last name was Miller, which would later explain why she used the name Cheryl Miller when she checked in at the Hollywoodland Motel. Why Cheryl with an S and 2 R's instead of Cheryl with a C and 1 R? One can only speculate. Maybe it was an alias as suspected, or maybe it was symbolic for her, a way to separate her from her old life. Regardless, this change of name was why the trail went cold so quickly when investigators first tried to find her family after her death. Carl added, he also knew that the family suspected that Mr. Miller was a drug dealer. This drug problem was not new, and it seemed that it plagued her for quite some time. Cheryl later admitted to her cousin, Ellen Saval, that she was a drug runner for the Mexican cartel. Then, in early June 1968, Cheryl spoke with Ellen on the phone. Cheryl was supposed to be the maid of honor at Ellen's wedding, but she couldn't make it for the dress fitting beforehand. The bride-to-be was worried that Cheryl might end up being a no-show for her big day. It had been years since they last saw each other, but Cheryl reassured her dear cousin that she'd be there for sure. Then, Ellen's wedding day on June 22nd came, but Cheryl didn't show up. So instead, Ellen's sister took her place. Neither Ellen nor the rest of her family ever learned why Cheryl never showed up. But Ellen always assumed that Cheryl's secret work finally caught up to her. I just figured somehow while running drugs she got killed or captured, or was sitting in a Mexican jail. Rita, with all of this information, brought her findings to the police. The case was then brought to the attention of Detective Mario Santana of the Los Angeles Police Department's Unsolved Homicide Unit. He interviewed Cheryl's living relatives, trying to piece together through photographs and first-hand accounts if she really was the unidentified woman from Griffith Park. Years of history and memories resurfaced as they tried to recall every last detail they could about their long-deceased sister and cross-referenced it to what the investigators already knew. This would either be another disappointing dead end, or a joyful conclusion to a mystery half a century in the making. On September 24th, 2016, Carl popped in once more on the Web Sleuths forum. The ID was confirmed. Griffith Park Jane Doe has officially been ID'd as Cheryl Ann McMillan. All three persons who remember her were able to describe scars on her face that are not visible in the PM photo and were not mentioned in any public descriptions of her. The coroner saw that as sufficient for a positive ID. The sleuthsters celebrated, but their excitement was tempered by a degree of solemnity. After all, this woman's death was a tragedy. So glad she has her name back and glad they accepted that identifier as proof enough for identification. Rest in peace, Cheryl. Rest in peace, Cheryl. I'm glad that her brother can finally bring her home. Fairy1, who began the thread, said, "This is such awesome news. I really feared there would never be an ID after all these years. R.I.P. Cheryl." Their hard work was not in vain. As Rita's story with Cheryl's brother John became public, there was also a similar outpour of well wishes from the sleuths. Wow, amazing story and amazing work, Carl and Rita. Great read, user Ccart posted. I'm so thrilled that a case this old was solved. Shows that anything is possible. Absolutely amazing. Tears in my eyes. Major kudos to the both of you. I feel that divine intervention was at work and Cheryl wanted to be identified. But just as Cheryl's name was restored, there was another stroke of good fortune. This time concerning Anita Drake, whom the sleuths initially thought to have been the Griffith Park Jane Doe. On November 15, 2016, just 2 months later, Carl posted, "Not only do we know who GPJD is, it appears that we also know what happened to Anita Drake." A woman from Minnesota, Dana Smith Casey, suspected that her mother, Linda Smith, may have been the Anita Drake they were looking for. Dana remembered her mother had always claimed that she was an orphan whose parents died in a car accident. But this was a cover. Her mother had intentionally kept her past vague and unverifiable, so that if anyone tried to dig deeper, they'd find nothing. This was because her mother had actually been abused by a family relative, and her parents did nothing to stop it. She eventually ran away, met a man named Samuel Smith, and they married. Though she only smoked occasionally, her mother Linda tragically passed away due to lung cancer. While she was settling her mother's estates, Dana stumbled upon a lockbox, which contained a document that detailed a name change from Anita Drake to Linda Smith. Dana went on a hunt to find the family she never knew, but even after years of searching, there was nothing to show for it. But then she stumbled upon an article entitled, "Family Hopes DNA Can Find Anita Drake After 50 Years." And when she opened the article, the photo of a young Anita Drake appeared. It was clearly her mother. Dana sent her DNA to be tested, putting her in touch with her mother's surviving siblings, her uncle and aunt, Roger Drake and Debbie Drake Ralston. Then, a year later in 2017, the Missing Persons Database, the Charlie Project, confirmed the match. Dana's mother, Linda Smith, was Anita K. Drake. On hearing this, the sleuths were as thrilled as they were with Cheryl Miller's case. That's excellent news, and a relatively happy ending too. OMG, I'm so happy to see this. Wow, thank you, Carl. This is a lot. It's kind of incredible how many mysteries have been revealing themselves this year. 2 cases solved back to back was a huge morale boost for the sleuths, and served to keep them going. And as for Cheryl Miller, with her name restored, her family could finally lay the matter to rest. "She wasn't just some heroin addict in a park," John remarked. "She was my sister." John realized that, despite her struggle with drug abuse and work as a trafficker, Cheryl never sold their grandmother's ring, the one thing that allowed her to be reunited with family nearly 50 years after her death. Perhaps this small act meant that, despite everything, she had always held on to her family and a hope for a better future. And for those whose loved ones remained lost, missing, and unidentified, hope is often the one thing that can bring them home. If you want to hear more stories of mysteries being solved by regular, everyday people, then consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. And if you really want to help us get noticed by the YouTube algorithm, then watch another one of our videos, like this one about how internet sleuths solved a murder before it happened and tried to warn the police, but what the cops did next led to a devastating outcome.
And don't forget to click the link tryfume.com/brew or scan the QR code on the screen to get your free Fume Topper today.